Hello, and welcome to the Education Reformation, where it's our job to discover where education ought to go and how we might be able to get it there. Here we go. I want to talk a little bit about something that I think is really one of the biggest hindrances to higher education today, which is the meaning of things. So, typically in the natural world, if we were going to talk about the meanings of things, we would actually be talking about semiotics. I want to bring it down a little bit more specifically to language. And in language, the meanings of things is called semantics. So this is actually, I mentioned in episode 1, is one of my sort of pet topics inside of linguistics. My 4-year degree, my bachelor's, is in linguistics and communications. So it's something that I really like talking about, in spite of the fact that I've never worked in the field. It's one of my favorite things to discuss with other people, at many people's great annoyance, because they start to get a little bit worried that I'm critiquing everything that they're saying or trying to read too much into every word that they use. But typically we linguists are a little bit more laid back than that and just enjoy talking about the way that we communicate and the way that we get across certain meanings. So this is not the meaning behind things. Like when your mom thinks a winged celestial creature must have directed her to let go of the wheel whilst her car was crashing. So for those of you I'm looping back. I was about to tell you about my bachelor's again. It's actually, so I should pull over to the side of the road here on this podcast and let you guys hear about my education a little bit before we jump into semantics. The fact that I've never worked in the field is a pretty big issue for me because I spent, 4 years and countless thousands of dollars trying to become a theoretical linguist. And after I got out of school, it was kind of like, okay, like, now what? There's not really any jobs out there for linguists that are very common. So if you're a linguist, it's pretty much you either go the track of professorship and that kind of thing, or you continue schooling specifically and kind of narrow down your niche and where you want to work inside of linguistics, whether you want to be like an FBI consultant, or you sit around and listen to bad guys talk and then try and figure out where they're from based on inflections in their voice and different fricatives or whatever that they use. And I basically fell victim to the old joke, choose something that you love to do and you'll never work a day in your life, because that field's probably not hiring. Excuse me. It's still a little bit early in the morning, so I'm wanting to cough a little bit. So that's where I'm at. I'm 28 now, so I've been graduated for 6 years, and I've still been kind of philandering about trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, because I've got all these ideas in my head. I think I'm pretty intelligent. It should be relatively easy for me to find a good field to work in that is fulfilling to do, but that hasn't been happening. And I think one of the reasons is actually our topic today, is semantics. Let me write down. I'm going to come back and talk about that a little bit more towards the end here. Semantics. And why I don't know what to do with me life. Okay. Alright, let's jump into semantics. So semantics is the meaning of words. And it's actually pretty amazing that we can even communicate at all. If you sit down and think about it, we're basically just making noises with our faces. And the fact that all of those noises kind of cohesively come together to actually mean something is pretty phenomenal, because we all take it for granted. No one alive today was ever alive in a world where we didn't have language all over the place, where we couldn't communicate pretty easily. And I mean, now they have technology that can translate tens of languages on the spot. You just speak into the device, whether it's your phone or a separate piece of hardware, and then you click the button or whatever, and it says whatever you said in the target language, whether that's Spanish or Japanese or Russian or Chinese or Mandarin. I guess I should be more specific when I talk about Chinese, and the crazy thing about it is that we all agree as groups of speakers of certain languages. We all agree on what those phrases, what those words actually mean. And it's not even like an objective meaning all the time. So like if I say the word Nazi, nobody thinks the German National Socialist Party or whatever. They don't think about the words that acronym actually represents. They think person who hates Jews or whatever. Maybe I shouldn't talk about Nazis too much on my podcast. That might end up stirring up some politics. But the words themselves have weighted meaning. And one day, I'm actually a huge Joe Rogan fan, and I agree with him on this. I think that one day we'll be able to read each other's minds, and all of the stuff that I'm talking to you about today won't matter at all. But unfortunately, today is not that day. Maybe one day in the future, but not yet. So the bottom line about the meanings of words is that it's incredibly complicated. I mean, you can write books after book after book on semantics alone as a topic. And then inside of linguistics, you even have, syntax and phonology and phonetics, and you've got pragmatics, and those are all completely separate branches from semantics, and they also contribute heavily to the nuance of what we say all the time. And you and I are just sitting around talking, or I'm talking into the mic, and somehow you can interpret these noises. So the problem is, at this point, this faculty of language that we have is quite necessary. We wouldn't be able to conduct ourselves in a social environment at all without language. And I'm not just speaking about speech language using your mouth. I mean, some people communicate using signs. Some people communicate using various methods, but that language is actually necessary. When you go to the store, you have to ask the person how much something costs. So the issue that I want to talk about is actually inside of semantics. It's even smaller than that. And it's really nuance. So the problem that I'm seeing inside of education, particularly in higher education today, is that nuance is completely dead. And we're the ones that killed it, unfortunately. So we have, let's see, in order to speak English on a conversational level, you really have to know about 2,000 plus words, 2,500, just to talk conversation. That's very basic. Most people know many, many, many more words than that. Triple, quadruple, etc. But we're starting to not agree on the nuanced meanings of those words. And this is a very important breakdown because, as we were talking earlier, all of this meaning contributes to our everyday lives. We cannot, it is a necessary function to communicate accurately, to understand what someone else is telling you. Because, let's take an extreme example. If you have a knife pointed at me and you're going to attack me and I raise my hands, that's, clearly a symbol of surrender to most people. But if you took out the nuanced approach to this, you might think I was doing some weird kung fu, like I'm going to raise my hands up in the air to distract you and then kick you in the knee. And so when I raise my hands, you lunge at me. Whereas I was actually just trying to tell you, like, I'm, moving my hands away from my belt where my sword would be, and I can't reach it quickly, so I'm not a threat. But if you take away that nuance, if you stop understanding each other, that all breaks down. And there's some interesting stuff going on here with particularly like emoticons, because we came to this point where we were communicating a lot via exclusively text, and the nuance of that speech is left out because of the lack of facial expressions or body language. You guys can't see. I like to talk with my hands, so I'm waving my hands around the mic, and that is communicating things to whoever would be sitting across from me. But you take all that out, and you're left with just text, and you have misunderstandings, which we've all seen the memes and stuff on Facebook or wherever, of text conversations where people like misunderstand what's going on, and then mom's telling you to bring home the dead instead of the bread or something like that. So we invented emoticons to have symbols that represent our facial expressions. So you have like a frown, and then like a deeper frown, and a slightly deeper frown than that, and then you have a deep frown with a tear, and all of these intricate emoticons. And it's actually really interesting because the younger people today, I'm a little bit old on the millennial category, so I didn't really grow up with all of the emoticons that everybody else did. So people who are probably like 6, 7, 8 years younger than me, they can see these emoticons and recognize them. They can interpret semantic value from those symbols. I can't. I'm incessantly misunderstanding my girlfriend's texts based on the emoticons that she throws in. I'm like, I have no idea what this like upside down smile with a tear is meaning. Like, I just don't. It doesn't compute to me. Anyway, that's kind of a tangent, but it's a good example of this nuance being killed and then recreated in a different way. But I mean, you see in universities where nuance is being killed. We talk about, for instance, violence. Violence is a word that is significantly under question right now, because there's a lot of people out there who want to say that violence equals, for instance, like hate speech or something. But violence in the past has only meant like physical confrontation. Someone strikes you physically, whether that's through a tool, like a firearm of some sort, or with their person, a punch or a kick or a headbutt. One would have to physically commit violence against you in order to even call that the word violence. But today, we're starting to associate violence with, hey phone. We're starting to associate that violence with just saying words. So we'll argue that point at a later date, whether or not words are violence, I'm sure. So you want to figure stuff out, right? So in education, a big part of what we do is we're trying to learn things about the world, and we're trying to figure stuff out as we go along the path of greater understanding. And the way that society works is that greater understanding we get passed to younger and younger people progressively, and eventually you would have 8-year-olds who know how to do calculus, hopefully, right? The society as a whole would be getting smarter and smarter. I've only met, I think, 2 like 6-year-olds who can do logarithms, but so we're not progressing as quickly as I would like. But I'm not in maths either, so I don't know how to do logarithms, so I guess I can't blame the 6-year-olds. The point is, we're trying to get better, right? I had a buddy when I used to build hiking trails that when you're building hiking trails, you kind of get depressed because every day is like just more dirt, and it's a ton of fun. But at a certain point, you're like, okay, like I'm literally just moving dirt around. How important is this work that I'm doing? And I was talking to him about that one day, and he was like, hey man, like, I just try to get better. Like, every day I wake up and I'm like, all right, I'm going to get better today. Like, I'm going to be better today than I was the day before. And that's really what education is all about, is just getting better. You want to wake up, get better, go to sleep, wake up and do it again. And the reason that we're doing that, hopefully, is because we want to create the best possible outcome for as many people as possible. In a perfect world, that would be everybody. So we'll leave the hypotheticals aside. But you guys can't see this, but on my outline, I have comma right after all of these sentences or these lines, because I'm not actually sure that that's everybody's goal. I don't know if everybody's trying to figure stuff out. I don't know if everybody's trying to get better. And I don't know if these days I don't know if anybody at all cares about the best possible outcome for every single person, which is unfortunate. So the question is, how do we get to the point where all of this makes sense? My argument is semantics. My argument is that we need to fix our semantics, because dialogue is essential to figuring stuff out, to getting better, and to producing the best possible outcome for everybody. Dialogue is central to that concept. If we don't dialogue with each other, if we don't have conversations where we can have productive conversations, then we end up being very stagnant. And I don't want to be stagnant. I think that sounds like absolute soul death. It sounds soul crushing, right? I mean, that's why I'm doing podcasts, because I don't want to sit in my office at my job for the rest of my life. You know, I want to get better. And I think in getting myself better and becoming more on my own, hopefully I'll be able to eventually start producing better outcomes for other people. Maybe teaching other people how to, I don't know, use semantics properly. So this dialogue is absolutely critical. It's essential to our progression as a society. So what does this have to do with the whole Education Reformation, the name of the podcast? It has to do with Reformation because Reformation is made up of you people. It's made up of me. It's made up of my parents. It's made up of my future not yet alive children. It's made up of all of us, individually and collectively. Because you make all of the standards. Like, you're setting the semantic rules. There's a really great essay by Friedrich Nietzsche, or Nietzsche, however you prefer to hear that name, that I think it's called, let me see, it's called On Truth and Lies in the Non-Moral Sense. It's a really interesting essay where he writes about the arbitrary legislation of language. If you haven't read it before, go check it out. I'll make a note to put it in my show notes. I'll link you to a copy of it at some point, just because I think it's an amazing essay. I think everyone should read it. Let's see, On Truth and Lies. So, you make up those standards. That's the arbitrary legislation of language, is the creation of standards and rules and, you know, linguistic laws that we typically use. The key here is that there is no secret cabal of language. No one's going, well, maybe some people are doing the whole doublespeak thing in the government where they're like, we're going to start using the word terror and we're going to define it and then use that for whatever purpose we want. So if we ever want to like get something done that's pretty questionable, we'll just go, oh, well, it's because of terrorism, or we're fighting terrorism, this very ambiguous term that we've created to induce fright, which is actually kind of ironic, right? Someone inducing terror in the name of fighting terrorism. But so there's maybe some stuff like that happens for people's specific use, but in general, there's no secret room where old white guys are getting together and plotting, and then there's like the one character that's the woman, and she's a really strong woman, and she is really the protagonist of the TV show. That stuff doesn't work like that. Believe it or not, you're not the protagonist of the movie about the United States of America. But you are incredibly important because you are actually the one who is defining semantics. You're defining words. When you started using the term LOL instead of just laughing in front of people, somebody says a joke and you're like, oh, LOL, instead of just using the actual function of laughing, you started creating that standard. Now it's okay to say LOL instead of just laughing. You're still expressing yourself, but the semantics of that are changing. So, granted, don't start taking yourself too seriously because of that. Nobody's going to pay you to do this. You're not going to be able to make a career out of coming up with new fancy terms. We call them neologisms, for those of you who are currently pushing the glasses up on the bridge of your nose with one finger. So don't get... I want to use some caution here because it's important not to get too overzealous about semantics. You can start playing with semantic ambiguity and philosophical questions like the chicken or the egg, and all of that doesn't make you Friedrich Nietzsche. That just means you're philosophizing in an empty manner, and it's something that is actually going on in our collegiate realm right now a lot, where people learn about, for instance, postmodernism, and then they kind of transcend into this disconnection with reality that nothing really means anything anymore. And when things stop meaning things, then we can no longer communicate, and then society falls apart. People start running red lights and stuff like that, or people start creating their own militias down the road because they use the word prestigious and you use the word fancy. You create rifts in society based on language, and then you end up having a legitimate conflict, not like arguments, but like war. I mean, people have died so many countless times over nothing but semantics. Let me give you a good example. Taxation is theft, right? A lot of people are saying this lately, particularly, the libertarian crowd. This is what they put on their Facebooks. If you say the phrase, taxation is theft, what you're doing is you're taking a word and another word, and you're putting them together so that they mean the same thing. You're defining theft, right? Taxation is theft. Or maybe you're defining taxation, rather. Well, if taxation is theft, you make that definition. Now when anybody says, hey, you should pay your taxes, someone who has made that definition in their head goes, you're trying to steal from me. And if you're threatening to try to steal from me, then I am going to threaten violence against you because I don't think you have the right to steal from me. You're coming into my metaphorical house and trying to take things from me forcibly, so I will react with force. Whereas we actually kind of need a lot of taxes and governmental influence to simply manage the, 340 now million people that are in just our country. I say our, I'm from the U.S., in case you're not. But instead of doing these semantic backflips and or semantic acrobatics, instead you should use your words. I like this phrase because it's something that we say to children all the time, right? Your kid will be making just noises or babbling or cooing, and you're like, use your words, honey. But a lot of the times this really applies to adults more often than not. I can't tell you how many times I've been talking to somebody and they're trying to get something across from me, but they get so flustered in the emotion of the situation that they can't, literally it happens in your brain where you can't formulate the words. If you're interested, feel free to look up Wernicke's area or Broca's area in the brain. That's where your language centers are. And then look up the word aphasia in regards to those two. And you'll find some really, really interesting stuff out there where people have aphasias. It's actually considered to be a disease. So I don't mean to trivialize that at all, because it is a serious disease. I've actually had an aphasia before, and it's absolutely terrifying. But from an objective standpoint, as a scientist or whatever, I'm certainly not calling myself a scientist, but from an objective standpoint, it's a really interesting thing that happens in the brain where all of a sudden your words just don't compute at all. Maybe you think you're saying words that make sense, and they sound to you like they're making sense, but to everyone else, they're like jibber jabber, like just complete garble. So misunderstanding and not using your words is one of the great, what I call, fighting words. So, I don't know if you've heard the, oh no, that's the fighting side of me as a country song. I want to say there's a country song about fighting words too, but anyway, I just thought of another good, example, actually, of wars being fought over the meanings of words. I want to tell you guys this story. So, everybody's familiar with the French Revolution, and the Bastille. That's how we say it in the South. I don't know I can't pronounce French words to save my life. So the Bastille is what I'll call it. And, Marie Antoinette is famously quoted as saying, "Let them eat cake," upon hearing about the travesty going on in the, lower classes of citizens there in the French during that time, saying, "We don't have any bread to eat." And she responds by saying, "Well, let them eat cake." That's actually a misdefinition of that phrase, because obviously she said it in French originally. And when they came to her and said they don't have any bread to eat, what they said was akin to saying they don't have any pastries. And so she responded by saying, well, if they don't have any pastries, like, they're just being picky. Let them eat something else. Like, let them eat cake or pound cake or pudding or whatever. She didn't understand that literally they did not have any food to eat. They were just looking for, like, regular old bread. Like, we just want some sort of carbohydrates, please. And so the whole French Revolution, or at least this particular instance with the Bastille, was really created by a semantic misunderstanding. And, I mean, how many people were killed during the French Revolution? I mean, it was like pretty crazy numbers for just that local area of France, or the country of France. I mean, you're talking about one of the bloodiest revolutions that I know of. Maybe my history is a little bit off there because, you know, Genghis set some pretty good records, but those weren't revolutions, so I guess I'm still in the clear. And the whole thing, a total misunderstanding, which was actually part of the governmental problem in that particular conflict, was that the bourgeoisie or whatever was significantly disconnected from the proletariat, and therefore they didn't understand. They never left the castles. They didn't understand that the peasants didn't have food. So when somebody came to her and said, hey, they don't have any food, she said, well, let them eat this other kind of food. Total misunderstanding, all about semantics. And then because the peasants heard that that was her communication to them, I believe she was beheaded. She probably a lot worse than that. I know that's when the guillotine or whatever came into. God, who invented that thing? What an asshole. But hey, I guess there's worse ways to die, right? They say your brain lives on after like 11 seconds or something after you're beheaded. Probably when you're beheaded effectively. I mean, I guess if you're beheaded slowly, that would... Okay, I'm getting on a bad topic here. Ignore that last couple of seconds. So, let's get down to brass tacks. Education and semantics is really about truth, right? Truth is not absolute. Truth is a convened upon thing when it comes to language. Now, there is objective truth, and we can discover that objective truth, but it has to be done via convention, right? We all have to agree on what the words that we're using to describe the truth actually mean. And this is a lot of where we get some of the current political climate, like talking about fake news. Because of semantic ambiguity, they being the media, can use very subtle tactics to sort of what's the word I'm looking for? I'll say a different word. This is called circumlocution. I'm going to talk around the word that I can't think of for some reason. I'll probably think of it later. The media can use subtle manipulations of the meanings of words to evoke certain emotional responses, or they can make up new terms and start to coin phrases that become buzzwords in our society because of rapid communication with technology. Even aside from quote fake news, you have research. A lot of people will, in the past, people have actually paid scientists to do research to come up with very specific objectives or very specific end results. And the way that they do this is by using semantics. They're manipulating truth by using things that don't make sense to other people. They're not using clear words. They're taking this and this over here and kind of mashing it together to make it seem like what you're saying is that X is true, right? When in reality, if you actually looked into the research they were doing, it might end up that they were just slapping gas masks on capuchin monkeys and suffocating them with marijuana smoke, therefore saying that, well, marijuana smoke kills brain cells rapidly. No, suffocation kills brain cells. When you aren't breathing anything but smoke, you die. That's how that works. In case you weren't aware, if you don't have air to breathe, that's not a good situation to be in. So it's, at this point, it's starting to become very, very difficult to know who's lying and who's not. Because some people are lying and they don't even know it, because they think that they're communicating with you aptly, when in reality they're saying words that don't mean the same thing to you that they mean to the person saying them. And thereby they manipulate this objective truth to become something else. And honesty would solve a lot of this if we would just take a step back, calm down, ease off on the tribalism a little bit, actually discuss things with each other. Just like I was talking about earlier, dialogue is absolutely of capital importance. But we're not having those dialogues, and we're not starting our conversations with, okay, for instance, let's talk about race. Okay, what does race mean? Are we talking about different races of humans in the objective sense, or are we talking about race as sociological groups, or maybe even socioeconomic classes? Which we say we don't have classes, but there's definitely various classes in our society. It's, even though we have probably the highest financial mobility of anywhere else in the world, it is easy to get stuck in those different groups for various reasons. I'm not going to get into that. So for instance, I'll give you an example that's really hot right now, is Nazi. Oh man, I think I said I wasn't going to talk about this earlier. Oh, screw it. If you guys get upset at me, feel free to email me and tell me why you got upset, and I'll be more than happy to try to get to your emails and explain myself, and hopefully we'll come to an agreement based on mutual truth. So the word Nazi actually doesn't mean prejudice, bigoted asshole. That's not the definition of Nazi. Nazi was a very specific political party prior to World War II that happened to come to power in Germany. So it's just like you can't be a hippie today. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm such a hippie because I like trees and shit. But you're actually not a hippie. You just like trees. the hippies were a political movement in the 60s. And since it's not the 60s anymore, you can't call yourself a hippie. So if we start actually being able to agree on these semantics, when someone says hippie, you're like, oh, well, actually, like I'm not a hippie. I just really like trees. You be honest about that instead of trying to associate yourself with a group of people. Just going ahead and using your words. We can start to agree on various courses of action. And this is really where kind of the rubber meets the road, to use a euphemism. Because when it comes to education, we must have a course of action. We talked about this a little bit in the first episode, albeit we were pretty intoxicated. Hopefully nobody listened to that first episode. Good God. There was a lot of booze involved. But if we can agree on a course of action, we can start to actually move the needle. We can start to actually try to get better. Whereas if we're all kind of like off on our own, doing whatever in our different groups of people that are tiny, we can't move the whole forward. We can't progress as a group, like a whole group. Same thing with religion and evolution. This has been a conflict that's been going on for over 100 years now, over a century. Think about that. It's been close to 4 of my lifetimes. Actually, I think I'm getting my dates wrong. It's been more than 4 of my lifetimes that people have been arguing about whether or not we should teach evolution in schools. Now, they point out a lot of things about this, and there is actually conflict, but evolution is the best idea that we as scientists have. So, and it actually doesn't even conflict with religion, which drives me nuts. I come from a religious household, and evolution is something that I've believed since they taught it to me in school. And I'm not just brainwashed. I actually had to go through a really long series of trials and tribulations, to use a religious term, to come to the conclusion that it didn't actually conflict with my religion. Which is kind of a God of the gas argument, but we'll get into that later. So, I'm starting to ramble again, aren't I? The idea is that this will lead to a better education for adults post-graduation, because by the time that we get there, we will have progressed. We're starting to create that progression where the 8-year-olds can do algorithms or whatever on the computer. And that's really important, because eventually we want to become the, gray-headed aliens with the big eyes, right? We want to be brilliant. We want to be the species that makes it to the stars. We want to be the species that conquers the galaxy, and not conquers, that's kind of an aggressive word, but discovers the galaxy and produces more of ourselves. We want to become a multi-planet or a multi-star species. And in order to even get anywhere close to that kind of stuff, we have to start producing viable education. And it's particularly shitty in the U.S., specifically in the area that I'm from. I think my ex-wife actually went to the worst school district in the entire country, and it's like 30 minutes from my house. So this is incredibly important. I can't emphasize how significant this would be if we could all just agree on the semantics of things, create a course of action, and start moving the needle of education. So that's why I think semantics is incredibly important. Please look into semantics. Read the essay on Truth and Lies in the Non-Moral Sense. I'll put it in the show notes or in the description of the video if you're watching on YouTube. Please look into this. Think about it. Talk to your parents if you're a kid. Ask them about semantics. Parents, if you're listening to this, talk to your kids about semantics. Kids are never too young to learn stuff. Semantics is not like dangerous knowledge. Dangerous knowledge is like how to create bombs. Okay, maybe don't teach your kids how to make bombs, but you can teach them about semantics, and it's not going to hurt them. It's going to help them. They will be able to win arguments like a master when they're in 3rd grade, because the other kids' parents won't have listened to this podcast. So to wrap things up, I wanted to finish up with a point that I mentioned earlier and took some time to type down, and that's semantics and why I don't know what to do with my life. So, quick history. I graduated college, got married pretty quickly thereafter, paid for my wedding working a manufacturing job, that obviously not a linguistics job. And after that, I started working for the family business, which is called Proforma, by the way. We sell marketing promotional products. If you're ever in need of promotional products or basically anything with a logo on it, send me an email. I'll hook you up. Be more than happy to have that sale. So, short little plug for the family business there. After that, I had some marital conflict, which is why she's now my ex-wife. And I started building trails. After I built trails for several years, my back started hurting enough to where I was like, okay, I need to do something else. So I stepped back, punt, and now I've been working at Proforma for almost a full year now. Yeah, almost a full year now. I've been selling for Proforma again. So that brings us to today. So what in the world does this have to do with semantics? Well, the semantics of the situation is that someone in the past told me that I could take my bachelor's and go get a job. Well, the semantics of that phrase are complicated because what's a bachelor's? Well, a bachelor's is a 4-year degree. A bachelor's is a 4-year degree that is no longer actually worth very much because now we have graduate degrees and postgraduate degrees that are almost a prerequisite to work in any academic field, which I should have known, but I was lied to. Not intentionally. It was just a misunderstanding about what a bachelor's degree represents. It doesn't represent what it used to. And I think this is a conflict that a lot of people roughly my age and a little bit younger are having, is our parents were telling us that we just need to go to school, get a good job, and that would be it. That would be easy. We would get paid well, we would have a good living, we'd have health insurance, etc. Well, because of some societal changes, those semantics are no longer accurate. So, as parents and as children, whoever's listening to this, as maybe teachers or education administrators, I encourage you heavily to think about semantics. When you say something, the thing that you say has meaning. It has an effect on the people around you. It has an effect on the children that may be listening to you. It has an effect on the adults that are listening to their children. When children say something, parents often read into that a lot more than they should, or sometimes they read into it less than they should. And all of this is just a misunderstanding about semantics. So, anyway, to wrap up the podcast, this time, I'm not sure how long I've been going here. Okay, yeah, this is about 42 minutes. That's cool. I'll make sure I haven't been rambling on for an hour and a half. Just me talking. So to wrap up the podcast, please check out the show notes. I really appreciate you guys listening, and I hope you have a good afternoon or night or day, whatever time it happens to be. You guys will be hearing from me again soon. Have a good one. So real quick, before you go, I'd like to say thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to hear more of our thoughts or debauchery, you can find us on YouTube and Patreon at The Draylor Show. That's DREYLOR. Or visit our humble WordPress blog by going to thedraylershow.wordpress.com. Those links will also be in the description below as well. Thanks so much.